One man, one heart attack, and a life-changing moment. John was just an ordinary ambulance driver, but one brave decision led him to an entirely new path. Could it all have started with a simple hat? Get ready to dive into this inspiring story. John was a 35-year-old ambulance driver working for a private healthcare institution. However, as the hospital's financial and administrative problems grew, it was decided to relocate to a smaller building and operate as a simple clinic. With this transformation, John was laid off. This sudden change turned John's life upside down. He had bought an apartment on an installment plan, relying on the security of having a stable job, so he couldn't afford to remain unemployed. He had a significant debt to pay every month, and he couldn't go even a single month without earning money. The severance pay he received from the hospital was only enough to last him a few weeks. Finding a new job proved more challenging than he had anticipated. Applying to public hospitals was a lengthy process, while private hospitals were barely hiring any new staff. Desperate, John began searching for other driving jobs. Time was working against him, and he had to evaluate his options and accept the first job he could find. Eventually, he came across an advertisement for a personal driver for a wealthy businessman. Among the applicants, John was the most experienced and professional, so his application was quickly accepted, and he started the job. However, being a private driver turned out to be much more difficult than he had expected. In this job, no one was kind. As an ambulance driver, he had been part of a team working together to save lives, learning to cope with high-pressure situations. Now he was taking orders, often for trivial reasons, and frequently faced scolding. Being under constant supervision and staying on standby at all times wore him out both physically and mentally. With each passing day, John missed his old job and the sense of teamwork that came with it even more. That day, John reluctantly went to work, feeling more miserable than ever. As he waited by the sleek black car, the man he worked for strolled out of his opulent villa, finishing his breakfast. Upon seeing John, the man smirked and said, "You know why we gave you that hat? So everyone knows who you are." John clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath to suppress his frustration as he placed the cap on his head. The man continued, his tone sharp and condescending, "Do you have any idea how many people I have in black suits like yours? That damn hat is the only thing that shows you're the driver." Swallowing his pride, John forced himself to reply, "Of course, sir," and opened the car door. The man slid into the back seat, then muttered, "Apparently standing next to the car isn't obvious enough," as John shut the door. Climbing into the driver's seat, John asked flatly, "Where to, sir?" "A family friend's charity event," the man snapped before rattling off the address. Moments later, he was absorbed in a phone call, his tone switching between curt and falsely polite. As John maneuvered the car through the city streets, his thoughts circled back to the hat perched on his head. He loathed it, an unnecessary weight that seemed to press down on him as a constant reminder of his subordinate role. It had been only 2 weeks since he'd started this job, and already, the cracks in his patience were showing. Still, John thought of his mounting debts, the mortgage he couldn't afford to miss, and the promises he'd made to himself. "I can deal with a damn hat," he muttered internally, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. For now, at least, he had no other choice. As John navigated through the bustling streets toward their destination, he came to a stop at a red light. From the back seat, he could hear his boss cursing, this time at the traffic signal. Every sharp word grated on John's nerves, but he kept silent, gripping the steering wheel tighter. When the light turned green, he continued driving, his eyes scanning the road ahead. A few minutes later, they passed a park blanketed in snow. That's when John noticed a man walking along the edge of the park, clutching his scarf tightly around his neck. In one swift motion, the man yanked the scarf off and pressed a hand to his chest before collapsing onto the snow. John's heart raced as he instantly recognized the signs of a heart attack. Without a second thought, he pulled the car to the side of the road and jumped out. From the back seat, the wealthy man exploded in anger. "What the hell are you doing? Get back in the car, you idiot! We're going to be late for the event," he yelled, his voice dripping with frustration. John ignored him, slamming the door behind him as he rushed toward the fallen man, his instincts from years of emergency work kicking in. John immediately dropped to his knees and began performing first aid on the man lying motionless in the snow. He had handled emergencies like this countless times before, and now his instincts kicked in automatically. He checked the man's pulse, weak and erratic. The man was completely unresponsive. Without hesitation, John started chest compressions. As he worked, a few bystanders began to gather, unsure of what to do. "Someone call an ambulance," John shouted, his voice a mix of urgency and determination. From the back seat of the car, the wealthy man stepped out, his face twisting in anger. "What the hell are you doing, John?" he barked. "Call a damn ambulance and get back in the car. I'm not about to be late for this event because of you." John ignored him, his focus entirely on the unconscious man. Sweat dripped down his forehead despite the freezing air. The man's dismissive attitude was infuriating, and John could feel his anger bubbling under the surface. He kept pressing on the man's chest, trying to maintain a steady rhythm. "John, this isn't your job," the man yelled again, his voice growing louder and more frustrated. "You're wasting time. Do you realize how important this event is?" At that moment, John snapped. Without breaking his rhythm, he clenched his jaw, pulled off the hated cap from his head, and threw it forcefully at the man. "This man is having a heart attack," he shouted, his voice filled with fury. "What matters more, your event or a human life?" By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. Seeing the growing attention, the wealthy man scoffed and retreated to the car. Slamming the door, he started the engine, rolled down the window, and shouted coldly, "You're fired," before speeding off. John didn't flinch. He stayed focused, continuing the chest compressions with unwavering determination. His mind was clear, this man's life comes first. Each push of his hands against the man's chest was a defiant stand against the odds. Minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens broke through the tension, and an ambulance finally arrived. As the paramedics rushed to take over, John stepped back, breathing heavily, his hands trembling from the effort. He bent over, resting his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath while watching the professionals work. John took a deep breath, trying to calm himself as the adrenaline subsided. But as his heartbeat slowed, the weight of his situation hit him like a freight train. He had just lost his job, and the reality of his debts came crashing down on him. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but there was nothing he could do about it now. The paramedics loaded the man into the ambulance, preparing to leave. Just as the doors closed, John noticed something on the ground, a phone. He picked it up and realized it must belong to the man who had suffered the heart attack. He rushed toward the ambulance, but it pulled away before he could reach it. Slipping the phone into his pocket, John thought, "I'll take it to the hospital and hand it over there." The ambulance likely came from the nearest hospital, and he figured it wouldn't be hard to find. As he walked toward the bus stop, a wave of unease settled over him. His chest felt tight, but he couldn't decide if it was from frustration, disappointment, or sheer exhaustion. Losing this job stirred conflicting emotions. Part of him felt angry and defeated, but another part recognized a strange sense of relief. Maybe it's for the best, he thought, his breath visible in the cold air. Working under that man was unbearable anyway. The humiliation, the constant orders, it wasn't something he could endure much longer. Stopping at the bus stop, John clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "I'll figure it out. I always do." Though the road ahead seemed uncertain, he knew he couldn't give up. When the bus arrived, John boarded and headed straight to the hospital. As he walked toward the reception desk, his thoughts kept swirling. He was still trying to process everything that had happened, but one question lingered in his mind: how was the man doing? At the desk, the receptionist informed him that the man had received initial treatment at their hospital but had been urgently transferred to another facility for surgery. John was surprised. Having worked in a hospital for years, he knew that patients in such critical condition were typically treated and operated on at the hospital where they were first admitted. Strange, he thought. But the fact that there had been enough time to transfer the man suggested his condition had stabilized, which brought John some relief. Still, he found it odd that no further details were provided, and without knowing which hospital the man had been sent to, he decided to return home. Once there, he plugged in the phone he had picked up, realizing its battery was completely drained. While waiting for it to charge, he made himself a cup of coffee and opened his laptop. Scrolling through job listings, he sighed. His current situation weighed heavily on him, but he knew he had no choice but to move forward. The sooner he found a new job, the sooner he could start rebuilding. As John was engrossed in scrolling through job listings, the phone he had picked up earlier suddenly rang, startling him. He had completely forgotten about it. Quickly grabbing the phone, he answered, and the person on the other end introduced himself as the son of the man who had suffered the heart attack. John explained the situation and provided his address. "You're welcome to come pick it up whenever you like, or I can bring it to you if that's easier," John offered. The man, whose name was Ethan, thanked him and said he would come to collect it personally. Before hanging up, John asked about the man's condition. Ethan assured him that his father was alive and recovering well after a successful surgery. Relieved by the news, John hung up and returned to his laptop. He began methodically going through job postings while pulling out bank statements, bills, and other paperwork to calculate his monthly expenses. The numbers were daunting, and no matter how he looked at it, he needed to find a stable income quickly. The stress wore him down, and eventually he dozed off on the couch. By the time he woke up, the room was dimly lit and there was a knock at the door. Startled, John sat up, straightened his clothes, and went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a tall man with a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm looking for John," he said. "That's me," John replied, shaking off the sleepiness. Ethan smiled. "I'm here for my father's phone. We spoke on the phone earlier." "Of course," John said, stepping aside. He turned to retrieve the phone but was stopped by Ethan's polite request. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" John paused, then nodded. "Sure, come in," he said, gesturing for Ethan to enter. As John returned with the phone, Ethan's eyes were drawn to the pile of bills and receipts on the table, as well as the laptop screen showing a list of job postings. He also noticed a framed photo on a nearby shelf. John standing in front of an ambulance with his former co-workers, smiling. John handed Ethan the phone and asked, "Would you like something to drink?" "Just water, please," Ethan replied. While John went to fetch the water, Ethan glanced back at the laptop and the photo. It was clear to him that John was going through a tough time. When John returned, Ethan straightened up and got straight to the point. "I'm looking for someone," he began. "Maybe you've heard of him. When my father had his heart attack, a man in a suit performed the first aid. The doctors said that without those quick actions, my father wouldn't have made it. That man saved his life." John hesitated for a moment before replying, "That was me. I was the one who performed first aid. And I'm the one who found the phone." Ethan's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "You?" John nodded and added, "I used to be an ambulance driver, so I know first aid." Ethan glanced at the photo again and said, "That's you in the picture, isn't it?" "Used to be? What happened? What are you doing now?" John, not wanting to appear as if he was seeking sympathy, gave a brief explanation of how he'd lost his job and was now looking for work. Ethan, however, had already pieced it together. He could see that John was a proud man who preferred to handle his struggles quietly. But to Ethan, John wasn't just another man down on his luck, he was his father's hero. "Listen, John," Ethan said, his tone sincere. "I'm deeply grateful to you. My father is alive because of you. I'm sorry for what you've been through." John shrugged and gave a faint smile. "It's fine. I'll manage," he said simply. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "When my father was stabilized, I got the call. That's why I transferred him to one of my hospitals. I run a chain of private hospitals. You might have heard of Live Medical." John's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Live Medical was a renowned hospital chain, known for its top-notch care and facilities. He'd considered applying there, but their job listings hadn't included any driver positions recently. Ethan continued, "My father's doing much better now. I take great pride in ensuring our hospitals are staffed with the best doctors and run to the highest standards. And thanks to you, my father had a fighting chance." Ethan paused, his expression softening. "I know you're a proud man, but I want to do something for you. You saved a life and I owe you more than I can say. Please let me help." "John, anyone would have done the same," he said humbly. Ethan, leaning in with a more genuine tone, replied, "Come on, don't be modest. I asked around while trying to find you and people told me you got fired because of this. They said that man was incredibly rude, but you ignored him and kept performing first aid. Not everyone would do that, it takes skill and courage." John remained silent, unsure how to respond to the praise. Ethan smiled and continued, "Please come work at my hospital. You can start immediately. We need people like you, competent, dedicated, and fearless. Plus, my father would love to meet you in person." John hesitated for a moment, but deep down he knew he couldn't pass up this opportunity. Live Medical was a top-tier hospital, and working there could mean a fresh start. Ethan left with a firm handshake saying, "We'll handle the details when you come in. My father will be eager to thank you himself." True to his word, John began working at Live Medical as an ambulance driver, a role he excelled in. But the surprises didn't end there. A week into his new job, John received a call from his bank. They informed him that all of his outstanding debts, including the loan for his apartment, had been fully paid off by Live Medical. Overwhelmed, John contacted Ethan and his father to express his heartfelt gratitude. Both of them dismissed his thanks, saying it was the least they could do. "You saved a life, John," Ethan said. "You deserve this and so much more." With his burdens lifted, John returned to doing what he did best. driving ambulances, responding to emergencies, and helping to save countless lives. He found a renewed sense of purpose, knowing he was right where he belonged. And so, John's life took a new turn, filled with purpose and gratitude. His journey reminded him and everyone else that even in the toughest times, doing the right thing can lead to unexpected blessings. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales. Also, I'd love to know where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's connect.